out of the main playable cast of Persona 4, Teddie might be the most controversial and, dare I say, most disliked character among the Western fanbase. While I kind of get it, it's also such a shame since the specific things people dislike about him are largely a result of the substantial differences between his Japanese depiction and the English localization. The golden exclusive editions also don't serve him well at all, and to clarify, I'm mainly referring to the beach trip and fireworks festival scenes. In fact, I believe they do nothing but damage his characterization as was originally written for OG Persona 4, and this is regardless of language. Now, just to be clear, this analysis is not about anti-localization. The work of localizers have and continue to play an important role in making sure any given work resonates with a new audience. However, certain decisions are not without their hiccups and difficulties, leading me to this old 2008 interview with Persona 4's lead localizer, Yu Namba. This is a gem of a resource that truly sheds some light into the trouble of translating such a socio-culturally context-heavy series like Persona. Long story short, he himself said Teddie was the biggest issue for them to bring to an English-speaking audience, and that they did their best given the short turnaround time they had. And we all know how massive this game script is. So no, I don't think the localization team was insidiously making this character look bad. But on this note, I need to shout out Nenoline, a creator who has contributed so much amazing work to the Persona space and Japanese media and Jungian adjacent things over the years. I've referenced her before on my channel, such as the Nyx is a planet stuff, and most of the localization differences I'm going to share in this video are thanks to her excellent Tumblr posts that you can find linked down in the description along with all my other sources as always. But essentially, from the way he acquires his name to the removal and changes to many of his running gags, Teddie comes across as far more creepy and perverted in English than in Japanese. Lastly, before we proceed with this video, I just want to comment on the overall structure. My aim is for this to feel like two broader sections. The first half will be focused on understanding the real Teddie, as he's written in Persona 4. So his entire character arc without the translation mishaps, and without any of Golden's Flanderizing scenes. Plus, we'll discuss the Japanese Yuru-Kyara, a specific type of local mascot that adds a lot of sociocultural context to Teddie and his role within the story. Then the second major half of the video will focus on the Golden expansion. Thanks for sitting through this super long preface, now we can finally dive right in. So to start off, Teddie's English localized name and how it's introduced in the story already differs and slightly detracts from the crux of his character arc, his lack of an identity. You see, his original name, Kuma, which means bear in Japanese, is something Yosuke gives to him in P4's original script. Meanwhile, in the English release, he's the one who introduces himself as Teddie. The early months of Persona 4 make it a point that he doesn't know anything about his origins or even what he really is. Before he develops his human form, he's quite literally hollow inside his bear costume. Thus, his absence of identity is further captured by Yosuke naming him in the OG P4. Then we get to the reason why Yosuke chose Kuma. This wasn't solely because of the bear costume, but actually more due to the specific vocal tick Teddie uses in the Japanese language. He tacks on Kuma at the end of sentences and/or inserts it into his speech.
戻るのももったいないし、ここで待ってたクマ。あ、さっきお名前聞かれたから、クマだって言っといたクマよ。 前より鼻利かなくなってきてるけど、それくらいは間違えないクマよ。
A cute, childish way to add flavor to speech. A significant part of Teddie's mascot image and a connection I'll return to later in this video. Most Western cultures don't really have an equivalent kawaii culture, or i.e. a love of all things cute, like Japan does, so I get that bear puns were the best way they could translate this aspect of Teddie over. Nevertheless, the puns don't send a clear, very cute, adorable image the way these vocal tics tend to in Japan. Especially because mascot characters in shonen and shoujo anime, which are super popular and widespread, think of Pokemon or the magical girl mascot, also tend to have vocal tics themselves. And so, this brings me to the Japanese voice actor cast as Kuma, Kappei Yamaguchi. He's famous for these kinds of roles and had recently, at the time, voiced Furappy in Precure Splash Star, which started airing in 2006. A character that had their own vocal tic, by the way, as Furappy.
わざとやったんじゃないラッピー。許してあげるラッピー。
Now, when it comes to voices, Yamaguchi-san is apparently a kind of outlier in that his falsetto is superbly consistent and avoids the occasional dips back into "this is obviously an adult man trying to play a young creature and or prepubescent child" territory. In other words, most adult men who try to do a cute young boy voice eventually sound off, and even creepy, considering the Flanderized things Teddie says in golden scenes. And so, while not necessarily the English voice actor's faults, he certainly ended up sounding like a real pest at times in the localization. I personally hope and would like to see them go the direction of casting a woman as Teddie for Persona 4 Revival. Many great examples of women voicing young boys or mascots in anime and video game dubs, especially nowadays. I mean, we already even had Cassandra Lee Morris as Morgana in Persona 5. I think this will go a long way in depicting the childlike, innocent disposition Teddie's meant to have. He's not a teenager like the rest of the investigation team, so it's vital that they leave no room for him to be mistaken as such via his voiceover. But on this topic of mascots, I'd now like to explain the sociocultural context of the Yuru-Kyara to prep us for how Teddie's jokes were mishandled in English. So in the same interview I've quoted before in my Kanji and Naoto videos, Atlas Dev said they designed Teddie as a Disney-style liked by everyone TV mascot, and due to the game's themes, creating this kind of character was a necessity. Persona 4 features TVs galore, right? This theme influenced the character archetypes of the investigation team, which were all popular ones found in Japan's mass media at the time. Kanji the delinquent, Naoto the boy detective, Rize the idol, Yukiko the Yamato Nadeshiko, and Kuma the mascot. And in regards to Teddie, he's actually a pretty good representation of a Yuru-Kyara, a phenomenon pretty much unique to Japan. So remember my video about the Great Heisei consolidation, that time in the 2000s where thousands of small rural Japanese towns disappeared on the map, having been merged together as a single town? So something you might not know is that within the past couple decades, it's become quite common for Japanese prefectures and towns to develop their own respective mascots in the hopes of enticing domestic tourism and or selling more local specialty items. Seriously, I really recommend watching this video, but long story short, Inaba's reality truly captures that struggling rural town that has to adapt to the changing 21st century world and create a new, renewed identity. So accordingly, it's like Teddie manifested as Yasuo Inaba's collective yearning for a unique identity, a spawned shadow that metaphorically captures the town's struggle. This brings us to the term Yuru-Kyara, coined in the year 2000 and is a contraction of the words yurui, and the shortened borrowed English term character. Yurui generally translates to loose, but in the context of these cute mascots, it can also mean wobbly, weak, and or laid back. Think how early on in Persona 4, Yosuke and Yu easily push Teddie over a number of times, leaving him to just wiggle or roll on the ground helplessly. Also, just his swaying idle animation in general. These types of mascots are also called Gotouchi-Kyara. Gotouchi meaning local. An example of this kind of mascot is Shimaneko from Shimane Prefecture. You can see how she creates a very strong branding image. A product is easily recognizable as heralding from Shimane if Shimaneko is included. For example, the packaging of these local ningyo-yaki cakes. Now, interestingly enough, the most popular of these Yuru-Kyara is Kumamon of Kumamoto Prefecture, who debuted in March of 2010, which just so happens to be a little less than 2 years after Persona 4's Japanese release. So like, I don't know, was Teddie an influence at all? I mean, Kumamon's personality is described as full of curiosity and loves to be mischievous. I know, guys. Probably just a coincidence. Nevertheless, out of the estimated 3,000 Yuru-Kyaras that exist now as of 2025, Kumamon definitely enjoys an outsized popularity that extends beyond Japan to international audiences and markets. I can't help but see Teddie, or Kuma, as shockingly similar in that he skews this border of both a popular corporate mascot a la Junez, or at least this specific store branch, and a local town Yuru-Kyara via Inaba. And on a related note to Rize, while I don't think this was an intended connection, I find it kind of wholesome that it's Teddie and Rize who are the navigators of Persona 4, since if you recall the first 20 minutes or so of my dedicated Rize video, local idols are similar to Yuru-Kyara in that many groups were conceptualized to promote an area's local specialties. Or perhaps it was an intended connection, since human Teddie's reveal parallels the first time we ever see Rize in Persona 4. Now, to be fair, I think most players will have forgotten this cutscene, but she was advertising this refreshing canned drink, complete with the dramatic poses, and Teddie's human cutscene is also reminiscent of this beverage commercial. But with all this said, I hope this gives a clearer picture of what Teddie symbolizes to the general Japanese audience, including this culturally inherent cuteness and innocence that's hard to properly convey in the English release. So now we can get into what's perhaps the biggest blunder of original P4's localization, Kuma's running gag about scoring with girls. You see, Gyakunan refers to when women/girls aggressively flirt with guys, a term that's only used by girls in Japan and something that'd never be used the other way around. Instead, what men or boys would be using is nampa, and to further clarify, gyaku means reverse, so gyakunan literally means reverse nampa. Now, what's even crazier is that the mishandling of this joke extends way beyond the original script of Persona 4 and into spin-offs like Arena Ultimax. One prominent example Nenoline points out is when Kuma meets Junpei. He says, "I wanted to Gyakunan so bad, I did my very best to grow this," referring to how he grew his human body, of course. The shocked Junpei specifically responds in Japanese with, "Only girls can Gyakunan." Meanwhile, this final part of the dialogue is dropped entirely in the English localization. So back to OG Persona 4, how did Kuma's scoring joke come to be in the story then? Where did a creature who knows nothing about the real world pick up the term Gyakunan from? And well, the answer is Shadow Yukiko. Something to take note of is that there are certain instances throughout the game where only Yukiko is annoyed with Teddie. You see, the English isn't able to convey nor clarify that her annoyance isn't so much to do with Teddie being some major sex pest in general, but more to do with the constant reminder of her shadow self, the one that was doing the actual Gyakunan way back when in her castle dungeon. So for example, after we defeat Shadow Mitsuo and turn him in to the cops, Teddie makes a reference to the Gyakunan, i.e. scoring with guys, which only leaves Yukiko notably flustered. Additionally, Kanji's response is wide-eyed surprise, and he repeats, "What? Scoring with guys?" This is a pretty blatant example of where the English lock did their best. They have Kanji emphasize the scoring with guys part, but it still fails to truly convey the sociocultural context here because, well, there's no real equivalence in English. That Teddie is using the wrong gendered term here. Another time this ongoing joke shows up is back when Teddie first reveals his new human form. Yosuke indirectly teases Kanji about his shadow and what happened in his dungeon, prompting one of Yukiko's gregarious laughs. The only one who's cracking up, mind you, because for once, she's not the butt of the joke when it comes to their shadow selves. Prior to Teddie taking off his bear suit just minutes before, he makes the same scoring joke again, much to Yukiko's annoyance. Basically just replace scoring with Gyakunan, so can we drop the whole Gyakunan thing? Important to distinguish that it's always only Yukiko who actually gets irritated compared to Chie. So is Teddie being annoying here? Hell yeah, he is. But again, I hope I made it clear that in Japanese, Teddie's jokes aren't meant in a pervy way. It's more like when a kid keeps repeating the same stuff over and over because it gets a certain reaction out of people. They want attention, and Yukiko certainly responds every time to this. Like, remember all the freaking 6-7 stuff everywhere last year? And my sincere apologies for triggering anyone's flashbacks, by the way. Point being, kids don't have to understand what they're saying to find it amusing, right? Anyway, regardless of whether we find these jokes funny or not, they're often a major coping strategy he uses when he's feeling self-conscious. At the start of Risei's dungeon, he tries to repeat this stripe joke 3 times, yet no one laughs. He's intentionally trying to get people's minds off the dire situation, the fact that another person could eventually die if they don't save them in time. And I really need to remind us that at this point in Teddie's arc, his nose has been getting worse and worse at tracking down the victims thrown into the TV world, let alone uncovering the perpetrator. He also can't actually fight yet because he doesn't have a persona like everyone else. So in other words, he feels like the only thing he can do right now is keep people's spirits high. And if his jokes can't even do that, then what is he good for? This is also the first sign of his preoccupation with being deserving of remaining a part of this group. Persona 4's subtext shows that within the 2 prior arcs, Teddie was slowly beginning to feel like part of the crew. His unsuccessful joke here is majorly juxtaposed to the IT's last visit, where his jokes/antics, a la the gag glasses, got everyone laughing and having a good time. And thinking about him from the mascot angle further informs this insecurity. Mascot characters are normally expected to keep spirits high and are a reminder of magic and miracles. So yeah, Teddie uses humor to deflect from his unbearable loneliness, the alienation he feels from everyone else, and the ultimate fear that he'll be left behind. Teddie gets increasingly annoyed and irritated whenever he's left all alone in the TV world. First, it's the school camping trip where he could hear everyone having fun together without him. Kuma wants to be amongst humanity so badly that he manifests a human form all of his own not too long after. He gets so sick and tired of waiting for everyone's next visit to the TV world that he finally decides to try finding them in the real world instead. Then there's the sheer lengths he goes through to join them on the next school trip, this time to Tatsumi Port Island. His entire ordeal getting there is mostly played for laughs, but it does highlight his fears. The root of it being what he forced himself to forget, that he, by his very nature, is too different from them to remain after all. He's the only shadow that's awakened to human emotions and consciousness in the TV world. Truly think about that for a moment. All of us were born to parents, we have guardians, whether it be our blood relatives or adoptive ones. We then grow up with certain experiences with schools, peers, and family, regardless of whether these experiences are good or bad. They all make up our lived day-to-day and later year-over-year journey of life that shapes our unique identity. But Teddie has none of that when we first meet him. He was just there one day. Hence that inherent hollowness when you strip him of the mascot suit. This brings us to the first major juncture of his wider character arc. Teddie explodes himself to save everyone from Shadow Rize, which results in other Teddie showing up. Now, his shadow appearing in this very moment is actually a pretty interesting take on Carl Jung's theory, since he believed ego death was necessary to achieve a deeper transformation of the psyche and sense of self. So not only did he completely deflate physically, Teddie also gets fixated on the idea that there is no real him, or i.e. a kind of ego death. Now, interestingly enough, Teddie is the only party member that has a different persona awakening text. Everyone else is narrated as a strength of heart to face oneself, but Kuma's is, quote, the courage of heart to support one's friends has been made manifest. Teddie was able to brute force his persona awakening because he's accepted part of the difficult truth about himself, that he hasn't developed a solid identity like everyone else, but he also hasn't faced the entire truth of his nature yet, that he's just a shadow. 'Cause coming to terms with this is accepting that, on some fundamental level, he'll always be entirely removed from everyone he cares for. So it's not until the Namatame arc that he finally faces this truth head-on, which results in his second-tier persona awakening, the only one we get within the main story, guys, by the way. Something I'll have much more to comment on once we get to the golden section of this video. But back to Teddie's first persona awakening, even in this moment, he uses humor to deflect from all the vulnerability that was just on display. He exaggeratedly bemoans the loss of his fur and starts doing push-ups to give off that silly impression, which successfully gets everyone off his back. Rank 6 of his automatic social link captures this tendency as well. Naoto has everyone undergo physical exams at the hospital, and in regards to Teddie, his x-rays always come back too blurry to make anything out. And so, the whole group naturally ruminates on how he really is super different from them, to which Teddie responds with all smiles and quips. He finally just pulls out everyone's test results, for better or for worse. So, is he being annoying and grating here? Yes, but that's the entire point. He's purposefully shifting the conversation, getting them all off the topic of how alienated he actually feels right now. These antics eventually do succeed in getting everyone to leave until it's just you left. So as lonely as he was prior to joining his newfound friends on the other side of the TV, this new way of life comes with its own set of problems. See, Teddie develops this intense preoccupation with proving he's deserving of staying here. Now, first to touch on the more lighthearted aspect of this, becoming Junes's mascot. It means so much to him because it gives him an obvious role and place to belong. And the town of Inaba genuinely grows to love Teddie too, the kids and families especially. He does put his all into his mascot status, like during the summer rush week, working non-stop at the grill despite dying from the heat in his bear suit. But more importantly, there's his friendship with Nanako. It's significant not only because of the very tangible reason, i.e. the promise it gives him to remain in this world, but also because this is more so a peer-to-peer type bond for him. It's different from his relationship with the investigation team, because while it's true they're all friends, he's closer in life stage and mentality to Nanako than these older teens, which is why it's absolutely devastating to him when she dies. To add insult to injury, out of anyone who could have possibly done something, it should have been him, a being whose original home is that very world where shadows reside. So this brings us to the bad endings. Teddie's fate in all of them is actually really tragic. You see, after trying so hard to find his place amongst his human friends, he decides to return to the TV world for good. I find these implications a pretty underrated horror aspect of these bad ends, though it's sadly understandable given Teddie's less than stellar reputation among most of the player base. Golden played a pretty cruel hand in this, actually, but before I can get into how, we first have to unpack Teddie's other major tendency, repeating obvious taglines from TV commercials. Just one of these examples is when the team starts talking about a potential stay at the Amagi Inn. Teddie just spews a ton of stereotypical one-liners about hot springs that don't make much sense chained together like this. Another example occurs when everyone goes to the dojimas to eat watermelon with Nanako. Teddie spouts a bunch of taglines about watermelon breaking, a stereotypical summer activity in Japan, which even has Yosuke deliberately telling him to knock it off with all of these commercials. This scene also low-key demonstrates the wholesome bond Teddie and Nanako share as was intended in OG Persona 4's writing, with her happily repeating one of his lines word for word.
That's the essence of youth.
See, a big reason they get along well is that mentally they're both still kids learning about the world via their surroundings, especially from what they observe on television. Teddie even makes it a point at times to say, "That's what you're supposed to say, right?" after he references something popular. Meanwhile, Nanako's essentially a latchkey kid who uses the TV to get that human connection. The voices in the shows and ad breaks keep her company. She loves that jingle from Junes, right? Now I can finally address one of the biggest gripes people have with Teddie, and that's his overly lecherous sex pest presentation. Understandable, not gonna lie, but a big misconception. I know this sounds hard to believe to some of y'all watching, but there truly is this bearing of innocence to all of Teddie's original scenes that got lost in Golden's editions. See, much like the commercial taglines, Kuma also copies / reenacts the most cliche things as depicted on TV, because he's a child who is learning about the human world via observing these shows. Let's take Club Escapade as an example. What's one of the most cliche things depicted in a club setting? Ordering drinks and getting tipsy. And who starts the whole fake drunk atmosphere here? despite all of these being mocktails. Teddie does. Then there's the school pageant. Well, of course there has to be a swimsuit competition, duh. No joke, you'd be hard-pressed to find a pageant that didn't contain a bikini segment back then. Like, Miss USA didn't get rid of its mandatory swimsuit portion until 2018. Also, it wasn't like it was Teddie's idea to hold a pageant or anything. That was Kashiwagi. It's like everything was just set in motion and he went, well, I gotta follow through with scheduled programming. And if this truly was a problem, why did none of the school staff, aka adults, step in? And when it comes to Teddie's pretty invasive questions, guys, there are professional news broadcasters in this game that ask similar questions, even without a pageant going on. So don't get me wrong, you won't find me rushing to defend this type of humor or anything, but it also just feels like an element of Persona 4 as a whole, you know? I mean, this game has a ton of racy jokes, and if I'm being charitable, this is likely a remnant of the attempts to tackle very important queer topics in an unfortunately not so stellar way, such as conflating sexual orientation with gender identity. Plus, it seems like they try to present sexual intimacy / promiscuity as a stand-in for emotional intimacy / longing too. So actually, looking back at the Gyakunan joke, as well as the existence of Miss Kashiwagi and Hanako, Teddie's addition to this mix just feels like P4's writers fulfilling some thematic comedy quota. In other words, it's more of an anime-style game problem. So back to P4's original summer festival, Teddie's suggestion is essentially trying to replicate the harem experience, because he surely saw a ton of popular harem and ecchi shows that were airing in the 2000s, something that's not quite as common, or at least not blatantly right on the nose as it used to be. Also, I just want to point out that all the girls consent / agree to go along with him in this scene, unlike a certain part of Golden's beach scene. And ultimately, Kuma's still just a child and acts as such, with a lack of awareness for others that's typical of that age. He tries to eat Chie's corn, gets ketchup on Yukiko's yukata, and buys another idol's photo while Rize is standing right there. Again, a much more believable naivete and social faux pas. Though on this note, the more indecent undertone of Teddie's behavior that does exist only begins after he moves in with Yosuke in late July. Prior to this, he never made reference to anything physical, and even then, it's pretty tame stuff compared to the pretty dirty over-exaggerations of P4 Golden. So let's quickly rewind to the Gyakunan stuff with Chie and Yukiko in the early months. It was quite clear he didn't understand the physical or sexual implications of it. But take Club Escapade, an OG P4 scene by the way, in September, and him demanding smooches from Kanji. At this point, he's already been living with Yosuke for a few months. Yosuke is essentially Teddie's big brother figure in the same way Yu is to Nanako. And I'm not necessarily defending a boys will be boys culture, but I do think Yosuke and Teddie's relationship falls more along those lines. Though, on the topic of Yosuke, I argue he's the only other character besides Teddie that was also largely slandered by Golden. The writing really amps up his perviness, like we go from signing up the girls for the school pageant to suggesting actual sexual assault, like,
I'm sure suntan skin and a little accidental hand slipping is in our future.
I'll save the rest about Yosuke for his own video, but back to his influence on Teddie, I'm not surprised that there's this whole debacle scene in Golden's beach trip.
don't be so stingy. I think we're due for a wardrobe malfunction.
It's not just this new incident that puts Teddie in a worse light, but also the Gyakunan joke being morphed into this completely over-exaggerated flirting with girls thing that loses all nuance of P4's original writing. You see, Golden adds this constant "Teddie's hitting on girls" comment like it's some kind of quota for every new cutscene. Chie mentions it at the beginning of both the fireworks show and right at the start of the Junez concert arc. Then there's Kanji's comment on it during the spring ski trip. Like, I can't even put into words how shocked I am that nowhere in the base game, that I can find at least, ever says something along these lines about Teddie when it's everywhere in Golden. And we haven't even gotten to perhaps the most inexcusable example. So at the fireworks festival, Teddie just straight up hits on Nanako. Not in this innocent, chaste way like the festival from original Persona 4. This time it's this blatant sexual innuendo, with Chie's response leaving no room for doubt. Like, who asked for this? Also, this beach trip existing at all makes Teddie come off as a much bigger sex pest and annoyance when he proposes the swimsuit competition segment months later. And here's what I mean by that. There's no beach trip in the original, so the only time swimsuits came up was at the school camping trip, which, reminder, Teddie was absent from. He was stuck in the TV world all by himself, so it's not necessarily surprising if he felt like he missed out, and the school pageant was another chance for him to actually participate this time. Meanwhile, in Golden, he's already seen the girls in a bikini before because of the beach. So for many players, these incredibly fan-servicey moments are already unnecessary. So the increased amount of raunchy stuff in Golden can make Teddie's proposition at the Culture Festival seem even more grating, further solidifying him as a nuisance of a character. Which finally brings us to the main reason I wanted to bring all this up. It feels downright cruel that the most unnecessary and infamous Teddie additions in Golden happen before the main climactic substance of his arc. Cause I wouldn't be surprised if players are so turned off by him by this point in game that they don't care about the heartfelt conclusion of his character arc in December. Tragic considering how dark his fate is in all the bad endings. Yes, every single one where you don't uncover Adachi as a culprit. See, Teddie is already so insecure regarding his usefulness to the investigation team, right? He feels like he has to prove his worthiness of staying with them in the real world. So given how the wider case remains unsolved and or Nanako dies in these bad endings, the subtext is pretty clear he offs himself, since the farewell note he always leaves behind sounds very much like one of those notes loved ones find only after the fact. Or well, regardless of if he offed himself or wandered until his consciousness just naturally melted away, it's clear the being we knew as Teddie is gone forever in these endings. And I can't help but comment on an added note that one of the common gripes people have about Persona 4 is how it moved the conclusion of playable characters' arcs and second-tier Persona awakenings from the main story to their social links. So given Teddie is the only party member with an automatic social link, so in other words, he's the only one who gets his full character development spread out within the main story, Golden's tainting of his characterization just feels additionally cruel. Kuma's reunion with the others contains this heartfelt message. So what if there's this aspect of him that's fundamentally different from them? At the end of the day, they're all in a similar boat, each just trying to build a life that's meaningful to them with people who accept them for who they are. Finally, Teddie's growth and shift in mentality allows him to be that miracle breakthrough needed to locate Adachi in the shadow world, something Rize couldn't do on her own, and a far cry from the situation he was in just days before with Nanako's worsening condition. Anyway, to wrap this up, admittedly, I wasn't a big fan of Teddie before I did all the research for this video, but now, definitely a once I've seen it, I can't unsee it moment, and it's a shame he's been done so dirty since the original Persona 4. On that note, P4 Revival is coming way sooner than we realize, guys, and how exactly are they gonna handle Teddie this time? Who is gonna voice him in English? Also, I'm quite certain Golden's extras will be adapted over, so it's also a matter of, will they try to correct any of the Flanderization at all? Or I'm like thinking Persona 3 Reload did change a significant enough amount of some characters, not all, but like some, Akihiko. So the same could hold for Persona 4 Revival too, but who knows. I'd like to hear what you guys think or hope for Teddie in this upcoming remake down in the comments below. And thank you to all my patrons and channel members for making this video possible. Come join us in the private Discord where we do fun things like reading club and watch parties, and I'd especially like to thank my special fusion supporters: Big Clingy, Sam Bezjak, M. Meownalin, Malcolm Lowry, Jimmy Tapiz, Frank Sasaki, Phoenix Black, Weeping Blade, Meek Massacre, Tactical Salmons, Silverwind 847, and Anger Boda.